The city's breath hung thick and heavy, a shroud of exhaust and anxiety clinging to the brick and asphalt of Harlem. Below, the streets pulsed with a lifeblood all their own, a rhythm of survival and soul that the men in the room upstairs would never understand. They were outsiders, invaders in tailored suits, their faces pale and drawn under the dim, smoky light. They had come to carve up a kingdom that was never theirs, to divide a territory they believed was ripe for the taking. The air in the private backroom of the Lenox Lounge was stale with the scent of expensive cigars and cheap arrogance. This was a meeting of ghosts, of men who believed their own legends, their whispers echoing off the dark wood-paneled walls like the rustling of dry leaves. They were the commission, the heads of the 5 families, men whose names were spoken in hushed tones from Little Italy to the docks of Brooklyn. But here, in the heart of Harlem, their power was a foreign tongue. They spoke of numbers, of territories, of influence. They drew invisible lines on a map of a neighborhood they saw only as a source of revenue. The name on their lips, the one that brought a flicker of unease to their otherwise confident eyes, was Johnson. Bumpy Johnson. To them, he was a problem, a stubborn king on a small island, a man who refused to bend to their will. They spoke his name with a mixture of derision and grudging respect, a dangerous cocktail that had proven fatal for many who had underestimated him. They believed they were in control, that their combined strength could crush any opposition. They saw Harlem as a prize, a new jewel for their tarnished crowns. But as their voices droned on, a silence began to fall over the room, a cold, creeping stillness that had nothing to do with their conversation. It started as a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change in the pressure of the air. The confident smiles on their faces tightened, the easy laughter died in their throats. One by one, they looked toward the door, a sudden, shared premonition of a power far greater than their own. The name they had spoken with such casual disdain was about to manifest, to walk into their midst not as a subject to be debated, but as a force to be reckoned with. The real king of Harlem was coming, and with him, a silence that would swallow their ambition whole. Build up to the meeting. The whispers had been growing for weeks, a venomous tide creeping uptown from the gilded towers of Manhattan. The commission, drunk on their own power, had decided that Harlem was no longer a partner, but a province. They saw the vibrant streets not as a community, but as a resource to be exploited, a new vein of gold to be mined. The numbers rackets, the speakeasies, the lifeblood of the neighborhood's underground economy, they wanted it all. They saw Bumpy Johnson as a relic, a holdover from a bygone era, a man whose influence they could simply absorb. They failed to understand that Bumpy's power was not built on the shifting sands of wealth or violence, but on the bedrock of Harlem itself. His roots ran deep into the community, intertwined with the very soul of the place. He was not a king who ruled from a throne. He was the living embodiment of Harlem's resilience, its quiet strength, its unyielding pride. From his perch in a small, unassuming brownstone, Bumpy watched their clumsy attempts to infiltrate his kingdom. He saw their men, their faces eager and hungry, trying to strong-arm the local bookies, to intimidate the bar owners, to poison the well of loyalty he had so carefully cultivated. He saw it all, and he did nothing. This was the first lesson in his silent war: patience. He let them believe they were making progress. He allowed them to think their clumsy power plays were working. He watched as they grew bolder, their arrogance blinding them to the intricate web of influence that held Harlem together. Every street corner, every shop, every tenement was a listening post, an extension of his will. The old woman selling flowers on the corner, the shoeshine boy with his knowing eyes, the bartender who polished glasses with a silent, watchful gaze. They were all his. Their loyalty was not bought with money. It was earned with respect, with a lifetime of quiet protection and unwavering support. While the commission plotted their takeover in smoke-filled rooms downtown, Bumpy was weaving a different kind of power. He was a phantom in the shadows, his presence felt but rarely seen. He didn't need to raise his voice. A quiet word, a subtle nod, was enough to shift the balance of power. He was playing a long game, a game of psychological warfare that his enemies were too crude to comprehend. They believed in the brute force of a clenched fist, He understood the devastating power of an open hand, offered at the right moment. The meeting at the Lenox Lounge was the culmination of their arrogance, the final act of a play they had written without realizing he was the director. They thought they were summoning him to their court to deliver an ultimatum. They were about to learn that they had walked into his. He was not coming to negotiate. He was coming to educate. He was about to teach them a lesson in power that would echo through the annals of the underworld for generations to come. A lesson that would dismantle their empire from the inside out, without a single shot being fired. The stage was set, the players in their places. The King of Harlem was ready to make his move. Bumpy enters the room. The heavy oak door of the back room swung open without a sound, a silent announcement that a new chapter was about to be written. Bumpy Johnson stood in the doorway, a silhouette of quiet authority against the dim light of the hallway. He wore a tailored suit, the fabric as dark and inscrutable as his eyes. He held no weapon, was flanked by no guards. He was alone, and in that solitude, there was a power that 100 armed men could never hope to match. The room, which had been buzzing with the self-important chatter of the commission, fell into a sudden, profound silence. It was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of fear, of a dawning realization that they were in the presence of something ancient and unyielding. The cigar smoke hung in the air, a frozen cloud, the laughter and boasts of a moment before now a distant memory. He walked into the room with a slow, deliberate grace, his footsteps measured and sure on the polished wooden floor. He did not look at the men seated around the table. His gaze was fixed on a single empty chair at the far end, a chair that seemed to have been waiting for him. As he moved, the men, these titans of the underworld, seemed to shrink in their seats. Their tailored suits suddenly looked ill-fitting, their confident postures slouched and defensive. They were predators in their own world, but in this room, in his kingdom, they were merely guests, and uninvited ones at that. He reached the empty chair and stood behind it for a long moment, his hands resting on its back. He surveyed the room, his eyes finally meeting theirs, one by one. There was no anger in his gaze, no malice. There was only a calm, unblinking assessment, the look of a master craftsman examining a flawed piece of work. "This meeting," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that filled the silent room, "is over." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words, spoken with such quiet, absolute finality, were more powerful than any threat. They hung in the air, a decree from a king in his court. One of the bosses, a man whose reputation for brutality was legendary, started to rise, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Bumpy's eyes shifted to him, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. The man froze, caught in the invisible grip of Bumpy's will. He was a shark in a sea of blood, but in this moment, he was a fish in a barrel, and he knew it. Bumpy's power was not in what he did, but in what he could do, in the unspoken threat that lay beneath his calm exterior. He had stopped a war before it had even begun, not with a show of force, but with a demonstration of absolute, unshakable control. The room was his. Harlem was his. And the men who had come to conquer it were now his unwilling subjects, their power a forgotten dream. The silent destruction. Bumpy's departure from the Lenox Lounge was as quiet and deliberate as his arrival. He left behind a room of broken men, their ambition shattered, their power a hollow echo. But the true destruction, the slow, methodical dismantling of their influence, had only just begun. It was a masterpiece of silent warfare, a campaign fought not on the streets with guns and knives, but in the hearts and minds of the people of Harlem. Bumpy understood that the Mafia's power was a fragile thing, built on a foundation of fear and greed. To destroy it, he did not need to match their brutality. He needed to expose their weakness, to show the people of Harlem that their self-proclaimed rulers were nothing more than paper tigers. The first blow came in the form of a whisper. The story of the meeting at the Lenox Lounge spread through Harlem like wildfire, carried on the lips of the shoeshine boys, the bartenders, the old women on their stoops. It was a story of quiet defiance, of a king who had faced down the lions in their den and walked away unscathed. The story grew with each telling, taking on the quality of a legend, a modern-day folktale. Bumpy Johnson, the man who had stopped the commission with a look, who had reclaimed Harlem without a single act of violence. The story planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the people, a question that began to erode the Mafia's authority. If their leaders were so easily cowed, what power did they truly hold? The second blow was a masterstroke of economic warfare. Bumpy began to systematically cut off the Mafia's access to the lifeblood of Harlem's underground economy. He did not use force, he used loyalty. The bookies who had once paid tribute to the commission now funneled their earnings back into the community, funding local businesses, supporting families in need. The speakeasy owners who had been strong-armed into stocking Mafia-supplied liquor now found new, independent sources, their establishments once again becoming safe havens for the people of Harlem. The numbers rackets, the engine of the neighborhood's economy, were now firmly and exclusively under Bumpy's control. The profits used to build a stronger, more self-sufficient Harlem. The Mafia's enforcers, the brutish foot soldiers who had once swaggered through the streets with impunity, now found themselves isolated and unwelcome. Their threats were met with silent, unified defiance. Their offers of protection were met with laughter. They were ghosts in a city that no longer saw them, their power a fading memory. The silent destruction was complete. The Mafia's grip on Harlem had been broken, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet, collective turning of the back that was more devastating than any war. The gift he left behind. The gift that Bumpy Johnson left behind was not something that could be held in the hand or counted in a vault. It was a legacy, a living, breathing thing that would continue to protect and empower Harlem long after he was gone. It was a gift of influence, of loyalty, of control, a psychological fortress that the Mafia, with all their wealth and all their firepower, could never hope to breach. This was the true genius of Bumpy Johnson, the depth of his strategic brilliance. He had not simply won a battle. He had created a permanent state of victory, a self-perpetuating system of resistance that would forever keep the wolves at bay. The first part of the gift was the unwavering loyalty of the people. Bumpy had shown them that a leader could be one of their own, a man who understood their struggles, who shared their hopes, who fought for their dignity. He had proven that power did not have to be a tool of oppression. It could be a shield, a source of protection for the community. This loyalty was a powerful weapon, a silent, invisible army that stood guard over Harlem. It meant that the Mafia could never again gain a foothold in the neighborhood. Any attempt to infiltrate, to corrupt, to control, would be met with a wall of silent, unified resistance. The people of Harlem were no longer victims. They were guardians of their own kingdom, their loyalty to Bumpy's memory a sacred trust. The second part of the gift was a new understanding of power. Bumpy had taught Harlem that true strength was not in the clenched fist, but in the open hand. He had shown them that power could be wielded with grace, with intelligence, with restraint. He had demonstrated that a man could be a king without a crown, a ruler without a throne. This was a revolutionary idea, a concept that would forever change the landscape of the underworld. It was a power that was not based on fear, but on respect. It was a power that did not seek to dominate, but to protect. It was a power that was not about taking, but about giving back. This was the legacy of Bumpy Johnson, a new code of honor for the streets, a new way of being a king. The final part of the gift was the psychological dominance that he had established. He had planted a seed of fear in the hearts of the Mafia, a fear that was not of his violence, but of his intelligence, of his unwavering calm, of his deep, unshakable connection to his people. They knew that Harlem was his, not by force, but by right. They knew that any attempt to challenge his legacy would be met with a force they could not comprehend, a power they could not defeat. This fear was his final, parting gift to Harlem, a silent, invisible shield that would protect it for generations to come. The Mafia would continue to rule their own kingdoms, to fight their own wars, but they would never again cast their shadow over Harlem. Bumpy Johnson's gift was a promise, a guarantee that his kingdom would remain free, forever protected by the memory of the man who had loved it enough to save it, not with a sword, but with a whisper. Legendary ending. As the years turned to decades, the story of Bumpy Johnson became a living legend, a whispered testament to a different kind of power. He was a ghost in the machine of Harlem, a silent guardian whose presence was felt in the quiet confidence of the people, in the unyielding strength of the community. He walked the streets not as a gangster, but as a statesman, his every step a reminder of the day he had faced down an empire and won without a fight. The men he had humbled that day in the Lenox Lounge were long gone, their names faded footnotes in the bloody history of the underworld. But the name of Bumpy Johnson endured, a symbol of a power that could not be broken, a legacy that could not be erased. He was a king who had never sought a crown, a ruler who had never needed a throne. His kingdom was not a collection of territories, but a community of souls, bound together by a shared history of struggle and resilience. He had taught them that their greatest strength was not in their fists, but in their unity, in their unwavering belief in their own worth. He had shown them that a man could be a legend not by the enemies he had destroyed, but by the people he had protected. His was a silent reign, a dynasty of the heart, a legacy written not in blood, but in the enduring spirit of Harlem. The gift he had left behind was more than just a memory. It was a way of life, a code of honor, a promise that as long as the heart of Harlem continued to beat, the spirit of Bumpy Johnson would live on, a silent, watchful king in his eternal kingdom.